Hello, how are y'all? Hopefully good, maybe tired. I appreciate you being here otherwise. So I have this slide up. This is the talk that we're gonna have. We're gonna talk about maturing your software security program with Salesforce. So the context to this is it's an overview of a secure software development lifecycle. And there are a lot of security people that talk about secure software development lifecycles, but inside of the Salesforce ecosystem, sometimes it's hard to have a parallel between, what is, if you want to have a certificate, a certified executable and or assigned executable, there's nothing really parallel to that in the Salesforce ecosystem. So we're going to go over like what is that lifecycle like, and also kind of like what are some of the pitfalls that there's no parallel for. Forward-looking statement, don't make any buying decisions on what I'm gonna talk about. I don't have anything that is forward-looking, although you should take the knowledge into the future and use it, but hopefully it makes you money, but don't use it to buy anything. This is me, that's what I look like in a picture. I had a fresh shave that day, so I look really good. I have a CISSP, CCSP, GCIH, and I'm not taking another exam ever again. So I'm a principal security architect at nCino. That's my Twitter handle. Please feel free to connect. I love to discuss security with anyone who's doing security in the Salesforce ecosystem. I've been at nCino for about 5 years. As I was doing IT security, and for everything that means, and then I've made the leap into doing software security. So that's my lens. Not a developer first, but I am a struggling developer who's working on security every day. So a little bit about, I have to brag about the company I work for because they're awesome. So we are a bank operating system built by bankers for bankers. And we started in 2012. Really, this is like good context to see like what are we building and how do we secure it. So we have around 850 employees. So like there's a lot of security stuff going on. We have a lot of customers, so there's a lot of exposure for security stuff that might be going on. And but all while we're doing that, we're winning awards. We have a really good culture. A lot of like a very safe place to work around. If you have an idea, you can talk about it. So from a security aspect, we don't want to degrade that relationship. So we're very integrated and very friendly with all parts of the business. So like what is nCino? Does anyone here work at a bank? Okay, great. Talk to my salespeople. So nCino is like a worldwide leader in cloud banking. We're built on top of Salesforce. And we're driving efficiency throughout the financial market, the financial institution. So what we're seeing is that that our customers are able to close loans much quicker. We have different lines of business that we're working on. They're secure, they're compliant, and we're just doing great work. So we have a booth. Please check us out. And yeah, if anyone wants to talk about nCino, please. We have, as far as, does anyone work in the App Exchange ecosystem or an ISV? Or does anyone have their own packages they deploy to their own orgs? So we have around 20 to 30 packages that we have as part of our solution. And there's a variety of different configurations for those packages. And we have around 20 million lines of code at this point that's been built since 2012. So there's a lot going on. So what we're going to talk about, why does this matter? 4 o'clock, I appreciate you being here. I'm going to hopefully make it worth your while. And then we're going to go through training, threat modeling, all the things through a secure software development lifecycle. So one of the things for security experts is there anyone who works as a security person every day? God bless you. I wake up and I think like, am I in the news every day? So this is like my laptop. I'm like, oh great, it's like I don't make airplanes. This is wonderful. I'm only on Salesforce. And then I think like, okay, well, we don't use Kubernetes, that's great. You know, like I'm not susceptible to this. But some of this is really like fear-based. So in our industry, there is a huge, there's a huge level of just trying to scare us into doing something. And when we talk to the business, it's very easy to wield this, the security cannon and just start to say like, this is important because, you know, we're gonna lose billions of dollars, right? Like reputation's gonna take a hit, we're gonna go in the news, and that's not what we like. But really, like, I just don't like that. When I go to the business, I wanna have a partnership, and I don't wanna scare them and think that we're pretending to have a conversation, but ultimately they're gonna do what I want. And that's not what a partnership is. That's just like telling them what they want, and then eventually they're just gonna stop accepting my invites, or we're not gonna have good engagement, or if they have an idea, they're gonna feel like I'm not listening to them. And that's like the worst thing in security is to not be able to listen and hear good new ideas. So let's get started. So are there any administrators here? Any developers? Any architects? Awesome. Anyone else? Salespeople? You matter too, I promise. It's awesome. So one of the things when I learned about sort of like trying to implement a secure software development lifecycle, a lot of the documentation seemed to be built around waterfall and gates. But at nCino, we have an agile development lifecycle. You know, typically, like we know what these are. Like we know what the benefits are. We know that we should be agile. But from a security standpoint, a lot of the documentation around what we should be doing is really built off of gates. So it's all about what are the design requirements. So the idea is, okay, the product team makes the requirements, and then security is going to do the security requirements. Okay, now we have a design. Is that a secure design? We're going to have an implementation. There's a separate team that does like a secure implementation. What we need to do is we need to have all this integrated into the agile development lifecycle. What that also means is that we're empowering developers and product managers, QA engineers to perform these activities within their own roles and make sure they have the right guidance and the right training and not have that centrally located within one team. Now, within a company it depends on how, you know, the company's risk appetite. But to stay competitive and to stay agile and to continuously deploy and innovate, you have to have this integrated, and you cannot create like gates within the development lifecycle. So that was a struggle. So like, what does bad look like? I feel like I have a good idea. Not that we were bad, but you know, like you got to start somewhere. So there's usually like undocumented threats. You know, as a security engineer, as a security architect, I go into the application I've never seen. I don't know how it's used. I don't know if there's APIs. Should they be turned off? Is that how it was designed? There's no real documentation. Maybe it's a system that was acquired and all the people that made it don't work for you anymore. And teams don't have access to like best practices, so they don't know that they should be encoding inputs. Maybe there's no coaching, maybe there's no paired programming program within your development shop to have like a senior developer sit with an associate so they know what are the risks of accepting unencoded inputs. And you know, the designs, you know, this is like, when I think about a company trying to make money, like they're probably not doing anything. They just want to make money. Like that's why you're in business. You're in business to make money. And if you're doing only security stuff, like that, you're never going to get there. So I understand like why sometimes security feels like it wasn't done in the beginning, but you know, security wouldn't have a job unless they had like the business had the luxury to make your software secure. So that's one of the benefits of that we were on the Salesforce platform is that we weren't having to manage servers, we weren't having to think about exploits within a network. It was all handled by Salesforce. So what's the path that we go on? So initially, I was thinking about like, if we need to build a program And what do? I go to Google and I say, how do I build a program? And then I comb through all the OWASP recommendations. I start reading books from 10 years ago or from 20 years ago that have really good guidance. They're really smart people, but development changes like every few years. So and also like I'm on a platform that is innovating, and so like how do I use the tools that are available to me today to make the developers that we have happy and that they don't have to think about security? So I started using the OWASP SAMM. There's also a BSIMM. The SAMM is a software assurance maturity model, and that's a way of just saying you're going to go and you're going to assess yourself and say, these are my controls at this point for software development assurance, and this is where I am now, this is where I want to go. So it generates a nice graph, and I'll show you an example here in a second. Also, just don't do this alone. As a software, as a security person, I think that for me personally, I sometimes put it a lot on myself that I'm the one that knows all this, and that I see so much of the business. I take it upon myself to try to do all this on my own, and you're not going to get like a good assessment about like do the product managers actually know about security? They're thinking about security. It's just that no one's asking them. You have to engage with them. So have them help you with the assessment. So identify the quickest wins. Like I said, like if there isn't any encoding, maybe that's a quick win. You don't have to buy anything. And share your plan with the business. So one of the things that I've done is that for my boss and my boss's boss, and hopefully my boss's boss knows about this as well. So hold yourself accountable. Have your team hold you accountable. Say like, hey, like put a reminder that we need to have a meeting in like a couple of months just to talk about where we are with our program. And finally, you got to do work occasionally. So this is actually like planning, like creating JIRA tickets, creating tickets in your ticket system, and working with the development teams and prioritizing the security tickets among like sprints. So that's really like kind of the hard work around like how important is it to a customer if a security vulnerability is fixed versus a feature that's going to make the company like a lot of money. So those are good conversations to have, and obviously like measure it so that you can see that you've done something. Sometimes in security, like I feel like that we do a lot of work and it's behind the curtain. Like no one in product, our executives, the assumption is that we are secure. So that when you do security work, the assumption was that you should have been doing it. So you're just doing what was expected of you. And sometimes that's a little demotivating, but it's really motivating to see like a line get higher, or like things go from red to green. So I love that. And then also like it's a continuous process, so you got to keep going. So this is an example of what the SAMM maturity scores look like. Has anyone used OWASP SAMM? There are pluses and minuses to everything. This framework is very software focused. So I know all the controls. There's like SOC 2 controls. There's ISO controls. 27001, 17, 18. How does that relate to your software development lifecycle? SAMM gives you those points of how you should be maturing your product and your software. So you start at one place and you say like, where do I want to be at in two phases? A phase could be a month, a phase could be a year. You get to assign that. But if you're holding people accountable, make sure you share that information with them. So I mean, when you look at like security and how it's split up, governance, policies. Sorry. You have construction, which is building things. A verification, that's more in QA, and operations is like maintenance. So how do you do patching? Are you checking for vulnerable third-party JavaScript libraries, that kind of thing? Also, if anyone has any questions, I'll have QA at the end, but feel free to raise your hand. So when we look at the improvement process, So this is just like an example of what one would look like. So let's say like an assessment is, do projects in my company that are working on sensitive applications, what are the likely threats to them? And you can think like, are there URL hacks within Salesforce that you could do? Is this an internal or an external facing application? What are the integrations that have access to these fields that are part of this? Does your organization understand the threats? Like are they aware of what the software is doing? So I think it's generally not that someone's trying to hide something, but no one's asking. So those are the opportunities to get involved. And the results of you actually understand a lot of how software is built. And one of the things that I was, as a mainly kind of like a network and part of the IT part of the house, and not in the development part of the house a couple of years ago, it was kind of intimidating to initially start to talk about developers, especially when I was an intermediate developer, and then you're talking with another architect, and they've built this thing that is incredible. Then they take time to explain it to you. So it's not intimidating if you just realize that there's some humility that has to take place. It's like, hey, we need to talk about security. I just need to understand what it's doing, instead of just coming in and saying, hey, I don't need to know how it works. We're going to put these controls around it, and you're going to have to deal with it. This also just has one of the things that I love about nCino right now is that as I've progressively talked to the business, they are coming to say, hey, you haven't asked us this question yet. So people are expecting to do this now. So this is kind of just, what does it look like for us? So training is cool. Does anyone have a software, like a secure coding training program? There's KnowBe4, there's all these really good platforms, and none of them have anything to do with Apex or Visualforce or Lightning Web Components, nothing. So when I think about, and we work with banks, so we want to train our developers, and we have to let them know what to do before they're actually writing code. So our initial thought was to go out and buy something. But when we started looking at them, they were learning things that weren't applicable to their everyday job. And then that doesn't really help at all. So you can spend a lot of money on teaching developers abstractly about SQL injection, but Salesforce doesn't have SQL. They have SOQL, which is different. So the training within Trailhead actually provides the very best, and I haven't yet to see anything better, provides the best available secure software training for developers. They actually get a vulnerable org, they get access to spin up different attacks. So I mean, it's just really cool. The other thing that we do is that we track employee progress. So one of the things that you can use an app called the Trail Tracker, and that's on the App Exchange. And so when your developers or anyone in your organization, they use the same email for your corporate email, that actually you can perform a sync with Trailhead, and you can track progress for modules that are created. So if you have deadlines, or if you have within 6 months, I'd like a developer to complete these modules, you can use that to kind of coach them to make sure they're on the right track. The other thing that we have is we actually made our own Trailmix, and if you search for this on Trailhead, you'll find it. One of our dev managers made it, so making him famous. And it has a whole slew of making sure that developers that start off at nCino have the same baseline, so they have a general overview of what Apex is before we just start mandating software security training. That was the other thing that I noticed is in other companies, there's or in in the Secure Software Development Lifecycle, it only is talking about software security training, but the developers have to know the software that they're using before they can actually learn about how to secure it. So if we're requiring developers to go through JavaScript security training, and they're just out of college and they've never used JavaScript, Like we're just checking a box and we're actually not building secure software. So this is like a great start. Software, the security modules are included within this, within the same training modules that a developer has to go through. So for threat modeling, this is always interesting. I think this is something as a, does anyone have the threat modeling book? It's like a famous one, the Adam Showstock. It's still relevant. It's from 2014. It's incredible. It's huge. If your job isn't just threat modeling, it might be too much. But if you want to pick some chapters out of it, it's really good. But there's this abstract idea of like we got a threat model, okay, and then you get into a room and then you say, okay, we're on Salesforce. What are the threats? And it's like, okay, we've never thought about this before. So really, when you think about it, you got to think like, are there hidden fields? Are there fields that are not being shown to the user, but the user still has API access to them? That's one thing you've got to think about. Is the mechanism for data masking actually governed? Or is it possible to like unmask the data if you open up the developer tools? And like, are your components that you're building, are they global? Is the data that's coming through them, is that being checked or trusted? Also, like the use of Salesforce sites, there's a whole slew of updates for Winter 20 around this, but these are patterns that have been used in the past to have like webhooks for Salesforce public sites. I don't know, there's just like different ways you can get in. So definitely think about this. The other one is agile application security. So I keep this on my desk all the time. And it's just a good reference of saying like, how do we build security into every piece of our SDLC? So these are two great books. I would highly suggest reading them. So like when I also thought about design requirements, I thought about like, we need to be integrated. There isn't like I can't be in every, we have like 17 Scrum teams at nCino, and I'm one person, and so I can't be in every single meeting. And dear God, I don't want to. That would be horrible. So what we started to do was document a set of just baseline things that need to be considered for PMs and for senior devs that are doing the planning. And this is just around like, what should be expected when designing a solution, making sure that if there is an integration, what does it have access to? Hopefully it's not just an admin that has access to everything. Making sure that if we are needing an integration, that it is a single integration or a single user per integration. This is really helpful for non-repudiation. So if you ever get into a incident where those credentials get compromised and you've got 15 integrations running through one user, you don't actually know which integration got compromised, like all of them are. So that's one thing that that we require. Also, like hiding how fields are hidden from users is one thing that we talk about. So making sure that they're not controlled by HTML disabled buttons, making sure they're actually like controlled server side, so that the user, if they can't see it, if they can't see it, they don't have access to it. It's not just hidden. And also just sanitizing inputs. It's a huge one. We also write misuse cases, and these are really kind of these go into the BDD, the behavior-driven design. It's really like if I have a use case, is there a misuse case? So this is in the same ticket of if I want a feature, if I want a user to be able to create a loan, and the user has to be this type, as a loan officer, I want to create a loan. What I wouldn't want is I wouldn't want a non-loan officer to create a loan. So what this does is this informs QA and for the developer to make sure that they're building that feature, not just with the happy path, but also with the dear God, please not happy path. So also during development, so there are a ton of tools that are coming out. We use several, and I would highly suggest using several tools. So there are, Checkmarks is a huge one. That one's been in the industry for a long time. It's slow. So it's not huge. It's not really great for us just based off of how big our packages are and how many lines of code they are. We have a package that takes 4 hours to scan. It's millions of lines of code. So but it's good and it's thorough, but it doesn't give that developer who's running a build, who's opened up a pull request, immediate feedback to say, is this safe to merge into release? So what we've done is we've started working with PMD, which is a static analysis tool. There are other tools like Clayton, which are like for purchase. PMD is open source and a pretty robust community around it. So we have a tool within that the developers have to have installed on their IDE, and that can be checked through laptop management software. And they have to run it whenever they're developing Apex or Visualforce. And so you can also have customized rule sets through PMD. And so if you have any use cases that are specific to you, you can use those. And also, the developer has it on their laptop. We also enforce it through CI. So we use Circle CI for our builds. And when that build is happening, we'll start enforcing the same rules that the developer has access to. So if the developer by chance turned off the PMD scan by who would ever do that? I don't know. Maybe they got a new laptop and it wasn't re-imaged correctly. I don't know. But if that were the case, then there's a second layer of control to make sure those same rules are being applied. The other thing is a lot of what we see from our customers with security is like their org configurations. So from a development standpoint, not only are our developers thinking about how is the code structured, like are we performing all the steps to make sure the code's secure, we also have to make sure that the org isn't configured in a way that is inherently insecure. So one thing we always tell people is to use single sign-on or their own, if they already have a pre-existing identity management system, to implement with that. And I think sometimes with a business, from a security standpoint, we don't want to. I don't want security to slow down the business, but also it's really good to remind the business that they have to interact with security. So whenever we start talking with prospects, we always want to make sure that they've engaged their security, so it's not like at the end of the deal, and then everything slows down when security has no idea what's going on. So to make this easy, we just start saying make sure that you've contacted your IT, make sure this is, you can integrate, and also if you have two-factor, if you already have an app, you use that, but if you don't, there's included two-factor. And then also just making sure that API access, and this is not all of the concerns, but some of the big ones is if there is API access needed. So for different user types, making sure that that's managed. That can be a huge vector. And I love YubiKeys, so I put up a YubiKey here. They're great. Yeah. Yes, sir. That's right. Pardon me? Yes. Yeah, you can turn, in the profile, you can, or the, like for the user, you can turn on API access or no API access.
So you have to make sure that the API users and API only always check.
Right. Yeah, and there might be licensing issues. I have no idea. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that I have gone through the CIS benchmarks. CIS doesn't have a benchmark for Salesforce, but Salesforce has that health check. And so what I've done is I've just made a template file that you can upload into the Salesforce health check tool. And if you'd like to, you can make your health score be judged on what I've made for CIS benchmarks. It has 14 character passwords and all that fun stuff. The other piece is quality. So one of the hard things is for QA and engineering is like, how do we test for security? So we actually have a lot of QA engineers that are very curious about security. And it's because like they care deeply about how the application works and how to break it, because they love, like their job is to find things that break. And so what we've done is given them certain scripts to include within when they're testing fields to make sure there's no cross-site scripting, and also just to see if they can arbitrarily redirect a page. So those are like little things that we've done, but also just making sure that like they can open up the console. This is, you know, we're in training with our QA engineers, but you know, can they open up the console and can you write your own Angular code to do stuff if you're using Angular within your UI. So check in error handling. So have the console open to make sure that you didn't leave like a debug statement, or developers didn't leave a debug statement, and then making sure that there's no vulnerable third-party JavaScript libraries. So this is a huge one. So obviously there's like a lot of talk around like is JavaScript, is NPM secure? You know, there's some modules that get hijacked, and having oversight into a tool that has that can give a developer feedback on is the library that they're trying to import secure or insecure. You can use OAuth dependency check, Black Duck, Sync. There's a ton of these tools. But having that available to the developer, and then having the administrative controls to say, you know, we don't have to have a meeting about it, but if you've tried to include it, it's, you know, you're going to get feedback that it's not allowed because it's not the right license type, it hasn't been updated in 10 years, you know, all the great things that can happen with open source libraries. So, like, what did we discuss? We discussed like a ton of stuff. We went over like, when I think about being great at application security, you know, all of these are huge, like deep dive topics, but you know, it takes, you know, focus on each one of these through a remediation plan to really kind of, you know, seek that maturity. You can't do it alone. But the last thing I kind of like to think about is just like, don't be scared. You know, we can't yield or wield like security and breaches over the business to get what we want. We have to make sure that from a software aspect that there's still, you know, there's still value being delivered to the business. They're not just doing security work and no one's asking for it. So with that, thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions about any of the topics that we went over through the SDLC. Oh, thank you. Yes?
You mentioned two trailheads, and from coming from somebody who's self-taught Apex developer, and that doesn't understand JavaScript very well, do you have a recommended path through those trailmixes and JavaScript understandability?
For JavaScript?
Well, for just like the whole training regimen.
So feel free to go through the nCino development Trailmix. That's really good. We don't have all of the security modules in there because they're advanced. Some of them are advanced topics. But what we do, I mean, there's like a Kingdom app that you can go through. That whole, the only concern is that making sure that a developer is actually able to understand those modules because they are advanced. And so they have to be sprinkled in with, you know, the beginner, intermediate, and advanced, you know, Apex training. So if someone is just getting started in Apex, it's better that they learn how to write it correctly, and then we layer in the secure. So, you know, that's, but it is fun to see things break, so.
So the nCino one first before the
Yeah, I mean, the nCino one just has, it's the Trailmix that includes all of the modules, the Trailhead modules, yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
You said you're using the open source PMD scanner.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any kind of, does the tool you're using have any kind of UI, or is you're just running the scanner and reading the text output?
So one of the output types for PMD is HTML. So what's possible is that you know, if there is a DevOps team, or if you just want a script, you can actually run PMD in CI and then make a comment back on the PR.
Okay.
And that could be a link to the HTML. It doesn't look pretty, but you know, it gets the job done.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else?
Do you fill builds based off of PMD files?
We do. Yeah, we haven't done it to every one of our packages, but we do. So PMD is governed through the suppress warning annotation through Apex, and it reads that to see like if that suppress warning annotation is not there and it finds a rule hit, then it will fail a build. But you can also add the suppress warning. And one of the things we're working on is monitoring the implementation of the suppress warning, so that if a developer adds it, the security team is just included in the PR, and to make sure that it's a valid use of the suppress warning.
Will they comment any code like why?
They'll get added to the PR, so we'll do an inline annotation. Even though the inline annotations don't suppress the warning, we have to use on the whole class or the inner class. But yeah, so they have to give some comment, because when someone comes back 5 years, we got to figure it out. Yep. Cool. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.